When you have the president's closest spiritual advisor, Franklin Graham, son of the Reverend Billy Graham, publicly call Islam an evil and wicked religion. When you have Congressman Tom Tancredo, the somewhat loony congressman from Colorado, stand on the floor of Congress and suggest that in response to the next attack on American soil, we should bomb Mecca and Medina, then suddenly you're starting to understand how we have completely validated this war of the imagination that the jihadists are fighting. We have allowed them, we've not just validated it, we have allowed them to frame this conflict as a cosmic war. This is most frightening, I think, in the rampant evangelization that is taking place within our American military. Some of you may be familiar with this. For those of you who are not, I've been kind of an evangelical myself in this cause, trying to get people to be more aware of how our armed forces is being infiltrated by this very muscular new American form of Christianity, a new sect of American Christianity that my scholars in new American religions have taken to terming dominionism. This view among certain very conservative evangelicals, very powerful conservative evangelicals here in the United States, that America is the new Zion, that we need to create a Christian nation here, and that the only way to assure the second coming is to build Jesus' kingdom right here in the United States. That is a very powerful, very, very large, very influential movement within this government, and particularly within the military. This movement came out in the open a little bit last year. Some of you may recall General William Boykin, the 5-star general who is in charge of the hunt for bin Laden, who during his 2 months leave of absence from the battlefield gave a series of PowerPoint presentations at churches across this nation, in which he said quite clearly that not just that Jesus put the president in his position, he made this very, very concise and somewhat logical argument that, well, obviously the electorate didn't vote President Bush into office, so it must have been by divine favor. It must have been Jesus who did it. And he went on to say in that speech, in that series of speeches, that, quote, the enemy is not Osama bin Laden. The enemy is not Saddam Hussein. The enemy is Satan. Satan who is fighting against God's Christian army and can only be defeated if we come against him in Jesus' name. Now, again, no one would deny General Boykin his own spiritual views, but you must understand that every word that comes out of this general's mouth the next day is on the front page of every single Arab newspaper. I know that for a fact because I've seen it. If you want a very interesting exercise, you can go to Barnes & Noble and buy a book called Messages to the World. It's the collected writings of Osama bin Laden. And the thing that's fascinating about this is how often he quotes our politicians. How often he says, the president himself said this is a crusade, therefore it is a crusade. Now, where we are most at trouble with this kind of cosmic ideology is, of course, in the ongoing cycle of violence between Israel and the Palestinian territories. And this is a conflict that has been going on, of course, for decades and decades, and in which the sense of cosmic war, the cosmic battle, it's almost sort of ground zero for that cosmic war between the angels and the demons of the heavenly realm. And so often we hear this conflict as one between Jews and Muslims, as opposed to between Israelis and Palestinians or Israelis and Arabs. But again, when Senator James Inhofe of Oklahoma, some of you may know Senator Inhofe, he's famous for stating about 5-6 months ago that global warming is the greatest hoax ever played on humanity, which frankly wouldn't be nearly as frightening a thing to say, except that until about a few months ago he was chair of the Senate Environmental Committee. Senator Inhofe, who referred to the ongoing cycle of violence in Israel as, quote, not a territorial or political battle, but a war over whether or not the word of God is true. We have to understand that if we are embroiled in an ideological war, and we're reminded repeatedly from our political leaders that we are, then the greatest tool at our disposal in a war of ideas is our words. The words that we use become the most powerful weapon in fighting, in defeating this ideology of jihadism. Because what has made this such a sophisticated and successful ideology is that they have used propaganda to convince the Muslim world over the last 2-3 years, and this is why my speeches have become more and more pessimistic as they go along, that this war on terror is in fact a war against Islam. It's a war against the very identity of the Muslim world. It is a new crusade. It is a war, not a clash of civilizations, but in fact a clash of monotheisms, a war between Christianity and Islam. That is a war that we cannot win. We are never, no matter how hard we try, we are never going to out-fanaticize these fanatics. It just can't happen. How do you win a cosmic war? Simple. You refuse to fight in one. And until we come to a realization, and I say this as a scholar of religions, as a man who has spent most of his life studying religion, studying the meaning and function of religion in society, if we don't figure out a way to strip these conflicts of their religious connotations, then we will never figure out a way to put an end to them. Because as long as these remain cosmic conflicts, they will go on for eternity. Now, there is an optimistic part to this. There is something to be optimistic and positive about. And that is that we live in a country in which a Muslim could stand in a temple addressing Jewish brothers and sisters about this fear of a religious war. And that we can do something about it. That this is the only country in the world in which this can happen. That we are in a position of great responsibility to make sure that the inter-religious dialogue that is not taking place out there takes place in here. That the stripping of the religious connotations of these conflicts that is not taking place out there begins to take place here. Because the frightening reality is that if we don't do it, no one will. If it can't happen in the United States, it can't happen anywhere else. So as I finish my comments here, and as we spend the next 20 minutes or so in this room, and then the next 45 minutes next door talking to each other, conversing with each other, and that's all I'm really here to do, is to essentially engage us in a conversation, to spark a conversation. Let's start thinking about this one thing. How do we begin to de-religionize these conflicts? How do we begin to stop thinking about this clash, this war on terror, as not a cosmic war, but as a criminal enterprise, as an investigation, and to bring criminals to justice? How do we begin thinking about the civil war in Iraq as an issue of security, an issue of identity, and not an issue over whether who should have succeeded the Prophet Muhammad 14 centuries ago? That's not what's taking place in Iraq. And how do we most importantly and most urgently begin to take this ongoing, never-ending cycle of violence that is taking place in Israel, in the holiest place on earth? How do we take that and strip it of its religious connotations and begin treating it not as a cosmic war, but as a political conflict, as an economic conflict, as a social conflict, as a conflict that is going to be settled here on earth, not in the heavenly realm at the end of the apocalypse, because I don't know about you, but I cannot wait that long. Thank you very much.